Has already identified several of the European dictators during the Second World War that she would like to talk about. And so, Alana, let's get right into this whole issue of European dictators by talking about some of the three dictators that you've already mentioned, and give us some information in reference to that, and then we'll build up on the information. And by the time we get into the third segment, we'll have quite a bit of information in reference to them. Go on, give us that kind of information.
Adolf Hitler. What do you think of when you hear Adolf Hitler?
Well, I think of the Holocaust. I think of the World War II. I think of just a number of things. I think of brutality. But what do you think of, and why don't you talk about Adolf Hitler?
When I hear Adolf Hitler, I think of Anne Frank, her diary, the struggles that Jewish people had to go through, the pain that they suffered, the concentration camps that they were found in later after the Holocaust had ended. And now, Adolf Hitler, when you have to expand on this basically, you can't just say, oh yeah, he made the Holocaust, da, 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 da. It was so much more than that, so much more than that. I mean, he killed many people. He took lives that didn't belong to him. And I mean, and he just took lives and took lives. If you did something, if you did the slightest thing that he did not like, you were gone. And so that's what I think of when I hear Adolf Hitler. Now let's expand more on who Adolf Hitler was and why he is such an important part of this show today. Adolf Hitler was the Chancellor of Germany. He was born in Austria and died in Germany when he was assassinated. Now, he was an aggressive person growing up. He always was, and he grew up to be. He was the leader of the Nazi Party. What do you think of when you hear Nazi, the word Nazi?
I think of Adolf Hitler again, and the leader of the party. Go on and speak to it.
Now, Nazis were a group of people who basically thought that they were better than everybody else. Like, if I happened to walk down the street and I walked across a Nazi, I would get sneered at. I would probably get pushed or teased or laughed at because of the color of my skin, because I was African American. But luckily, I've never crossed over a Nazi. And now the Nazi Party is still, I don't really want to say alive, but still, they're not they're active, but they don't cause riots or anything, I believe. They're a party who think they are in a higher class of everybody else. Like, there's low class, middle class, higher class, and then there's them. That's what goes on in their head. And they think that God sent them on the world to be better, basically, that they're supposed to be better, and they're supposed to mistreat people who aren't like them or who aren't them. And so that's what you think of when you hear the Nazi Party. But now let's focus on Adolf Hitler. Now, this man who was famous for the Holocaust, most people think that his actions, his aggressive foreign policy, is what caused the Second World War. He thought that he was so much better, and that when he caused all this ruckus, that's what people think of when they think that he started the Second World War. And do you think that's true? Or?
He did. He actually started the Second World War in 1939.
In 1939.
By the invasion of Poland. Go on.
Exactly. And he liked to see this. He liked to see him having power over something or somebody. I mean, because if he didn't have power, then he would be mad, and then he would assign somebody to be killed for his own personal pleasure. But I just can't see how someone would enjoy seeing millions and millions and millions of innocent people. I mean, these people weren't criminals. These people never did anything to you. They were innocent people that got killed for what they believe in, what they look like, their orientation, what they were. If they weren't Adolf Hitler, if they weren't part of the Hitler family, then they were apparently nothing to you.
Why don't you give us some examples of some of the killing and some of the tragedies that Hitler caused the Jewish people? Anne Frank, for example. Something.
Yes, the most famous death that happened in the Holocaust was Miss Anne Frank. She had a diary, and she kept all of her experiences about the Holocaust in that diary. And when she had passed away, her father found the diary, and he planned to be able to, and he made sure that that book was published and that everybody got to see how horrible the Holocaust was. And that's what he did. It's been published in almost all languages. It's so many languages like German or English. And so, yeah. And so that's how important Anne Frank was to the Holocaust. And and she's basically the most, she's what people think of when you hear Holocaust. You think, you immediately think of the Diary of Anne Frank. You just right on the spot. And she was so much more than that. She wasn't just an author. I mean, she didn't even plan to be an author. She was just a regular girl who kept a diary.
Very good. And so in a real sense, you've identified Adolf Hitler as perhaps one of these dictators, and I think you've indicated that a dictator is a person that controls the government, the political government,
the ruler of
everything, and et cetera. And now, what do you think over the last 2 minutes that we have during this segment? What do you think that were some of the most destructive things that dictators did outside of actually killing people?
I think that was the worst thing that they did. I mean, they killed people, they ruined families, they separated families. They did so much to these people, to innocent people that didn't deserve this. And they were killed because of what they believed in.
Well, if you looked at these dictators, how would you classify them in terms of how they suppress folks' freedom and their citizenship and perhaps their right to vote? Did they control that aspect of the lives of people?
They took away every right that the people in that country had. They took away the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, the right to vote, the right to citizenship, and the right to be able to be a citizen.
To be free.
To be free, right.
And in a real sense. And so in a real sense, these dictators that you've identified in Europe during the period of the Second World War, you've identified Adolf Hitler as perhaps one of the leaders in a real sense because of the...
but he is nothing compared to Stalin and Mussolini.
So, and that's what we're doing. We'll get ready doing this next segment. We'll come back and we'll talk about the other two dictators that you've identified, Joseph Stalin and Mussolini. And then that will give us, during this last segment, an opportunity to pull all of this together and come up with some general statements in reference to dictators, European dictators during this particular time. Because I think that that's essentially what we're trying to get at, that while this happened a long time ago,
it is
that
still
the idea
today.
of freedom,
exactly.
the idea of citizenship, and the idea of voting is still a very, very vital. And of course, we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you, and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Alana McLaughlin, and she has given us some information concerning European dictators during the Second World War. And now she will continue her discussion in reference to those dictators. Why don't you pick up where we left off the last time, Alana?
Now, if you're just tuning in, we on the first two segments, we talked about my background in education. I'm Alana McLaughlin, 6th grader at John Early Museum Magnet Middle School. And in the second segment, we talked about Adolf Hitler, the Nazi Party, and how he basically was the cause of World War II. Now, in the third segment, I told you that I talk about Joseph Stalin and Mussolini. Now, let's start with Stalin. He was, when you rank these three men, basically, Mussolini would be like kind of the man in the middle. Like he wasn't, well, not Mussolini, but Stalin. I mean, he wasn't like the worst dictator, and they'd never be the best. But I mean, like in these three, like rating them about how bad they were, Adolf Hitler would be at the bottom, then it'd be Stalin, then it'd be Mussolini, because Mussolini basically caused the most trouble. Now Stalin, he's basically the same as Adolf Hitler, but in a different form, had a different mindset, and so many other things wrong with him. Now, Joseph Stalin actually grew up a fighter. Like in his when he was a teenager, he had a history of being reckless, and he used to bully children, and even in church he'd make children cry, he'd pinch them just for the fun of it. And he actually got kicked out of the school for stabbing somebody, and then the next school he went to, he also stabbed somebody, and then he openly admitted to stabbing his girlfriend in the arm, and these other people he stabbed them in the hand. I mean, think of how painful that must be. And then he openly admitted that he stabbed his girlfriend in the arm. So he grew up a violent youth, and then grew up to be an even more violent person. So those are some of the fun facts that I learned about Joseph Stalin over the weekend. And now let's get into the real stuff. Now we talk. So when you talk about European dictators? If you're also just tuning in, a dictator is basically like a ruler, a person that controls everything, the government, the police, the court. He controls everything, and then dictator also took away something from citizens, 3 things from citizens: the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, the right to vote, the right to be free, and the right to be a citizen. They had no rights. It's basically like how African Americans were in segregation, but much, 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 much worse. Because, I mean, when African Americans, they were beaten to death, and I mean, the Caucasian community didn't really care. I mean, because that's what they thought should happen to us. But back in Joseph Stalin's time, I mean, it was so much worse. They put them in concentration camps. They torture them, behead them, kill them, shoot them, slaughter them. They do so much to these people, all because of what? Because they were Jewish? They didn't do anything to you, but because they're Jewish and you don't think they deserve to be on this earth, they don't get to live. I mean, who are you to say that somebody doesn't get to live or does get to live? I mean, what? And so, yeah, it's kind of a comparison. Like, blacks in segregation is almost how Jewish people were to the Holocaust and World War II, and all these dictators taking away their 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And now Mussolini. This man was a bad person. I mean, and he was a dictator, and he was just like Adolf Hitler and Stalin, but everything that they did, multiply that, he killed tens of millions of people. And I mean, that's what they all did, but why? What did they do to you? Did they steal something from you? No. Did they shoot your wife or your children? Oh, by the way, Mussolini had 7 children. Fun fact about him. But anyway, did they shoot one of your children? No. Did they try to steal one of your children? No. What did they do to you for you to kill tens of millions of your own people? You're supposed to be the guardian of these people, but you are just some evil being that decides you're going to kill them because they're not like you and because they don't want to follow you. And so I don't believe that's right. I don't think that's right at all. That's horrible. And it really hurts me to see all these people getting killed for no reason. I mean, why?
And Lana, I think one thing that certainly deserves to be talked about and pointed out here is that while we talk about these 3 dictators, you certainly want the audience to know that wherever you look throughout all of the continents, that you're going to find similar kinds of individuals. And these are some individuals we just wanted to identify as European dictators during the Second World War. We could have, I think you understand, could have gone to Africa. You've talked about dictatorships in Africa, in South America, and et cetera, and et cetera. So we don't want to leave the impression that dictators only exist
happen in Austria or Europe. Everywhere. It's bullying, basically. I mean, bullying is, if I just kicked you right now, that would be bullying because I'm putting my hands on somebody else. If they didn't ask you to put your hands on them, then don't put your hands on them. I mean, killing is a type of bullying, and it happens everywhere. Being made to work in farms bullying, you beating them, whipping them like the slaves were treated. Bullying, and it's a matter of how big it is or how small it is. Small, getting pushed down in the hallway, that's kind of medium. You killing tens of millions of your own people, that breaks the scale right there. That is the worst type of bullying. I mean, like dripping slow acid on somebody's skin was a method of torturing, which was banned by the U.S. But anyway, that's something that they used back in that kind of era. And so that's a type of bullying. You killing them and doing all this to them because what? Because they're Jewish, or because they're black, or because they're not like you.
Well, Lana, look, in terms of all of this, these dictators that we've identified in Europe, and as well as the rest of the dictators all over the world, what are some of the things that you can tell people of your age this morning in terms of how they have to react and how they have to act to one another, so that not only they might understand more about these individuals, but also be able to have a better attitude toward one another and toward parents and their relatives and etc.
Every school you go to, I mean, you can't just say this school doesn't have bullying. I mean, you may not know it, but every school has bullying. Every class has bullying. I mean, I want to say to children my age, I mean, if you see it, then tell somebody. I mean, because I know I've heard children say, like, if I saw bullying and I told a teacher, they were like, oh, you a snitch. I mean, that's not even the right definition of snitch. Snitch is telling fake stuff about another person just to try to intimidate them. That's not being a snitch or being a tattletale or whatever. That is being truthful. That's being a good-hearted person. So that's why I want to share children my age, because they're being influenced by all this music and all these people that tell them, oh, don't be a snitch. Snitches get stitches or whatever. That meaning snitches get cut for telling or whatever. I mean, I doubt that, and if you do, then you will die knowing that you did something good and that you helped somebody and that you potentially stopped that was something that can turn into a bad situation. And so that's what I want to tell children my age. I mean, don't think you're going to be a snitch, you're going to be attacked because you tell somebody something. Tell a teacher if you see something. I mean, because that's the best thing you can do.
And so, in a real sense, you think that all the bullying that we talk about, the dictators, in other words, dictators, I think you've already indicated in reference to Joseph Stalin that dictators can start from what? Bullies.
I know, because Joseph Stalin, he started out as a bad kid, a bully, a person who liked to stab people, and he grew up to be a complete monster, a person who killed tens of millions of people for no reason, just for enjoying, just to see them die. He enjoyed that. And if you see any picture of Stalin, you can see him smiling while all this destruction is going right in his country.
Well, one of the great things I think that we also didn't indicate is that there were also, during this Second World War, individuals who were leaders of the democracy, the democratic. And I think while you mentioned all of these evil individuals, you forgot to mention the fact that Franklin Delano Roosevelt
tried to save these people. He tried as hard as he could to save many people, and that's a hero right there. That's a person who wanted to save people instead of kill people. So he's the exact opposite of all these other people. He was a good heart person, and I just want to give a thanks to Franklin D. Roosevelt for trying his hardest to save people.
Very good. And of course, Lana, let me thank you for coming by and giving us that information, and let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.